A warning, this podcast contains swear words. It started with a skit in a library 10 years ago.
Hey, this is a library.
This is the fucking news.
Now, Paddy Gower has turned his infamous catchphrase into a new job and show.
Hey everybody, Paddy here, and have I got news for you? This is the effing news. This will be TFN.
But last year, when he tried to get his trademark phrase, trademarked, there was probably plenty of swearing because the application stalled at the Intellectual Property Office of New Zealand, or IPONZ, because of a section in the Trademarks Act 2002.
I think we can safely assume that it was objected to on these grounds, Section 17(1)(c, that it was likely to offend a significant section of the public.
And this is using the full F-U-C-K-I-N-G in its proper full meaning of it.
Absolutely.
So Paddy added a couple of symbols to replace letters in the offending word and resubmitted.
And that has been registered.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and today on The Detail, applications for trademarks are surging. But if your trademark is offensive or disrespectful, you're out of luck. So what is still considered offensive in New Zealand when it comes to trademarks? And should a government agency be the arbiter of what might offend?
It is problematic that you have a government employee making decisions about what's immoral and what's not immoral.
I had a little look on the register because I'm kind of interested, where are we on swear words in New Zealand? So it seems that F words are probably still likely to offend. SHIT marks, not so much. So some marks incorporating SHIT have been registered. So somewhere along the line, there's a dividing line.
I like the way that even though it's been registered, you still can't say the word on air. I like how well behaved
I have young children, yeah.
I'm chatting to a well-behaved Rob Batty, an Auckland law professor, and Lisa Ramsey, a trademark expert from the US. I started our conversation by asking, when did New Zealand first ban the registration of scandalous marks and why?
The why question is a difficult question, but New Zealand's had a long history of prohibiting the registration of what used to be called scandalous matter, or matter that could be contrary to morality. So this goes back to the very first registration legislation in the United Kingdom, 1875. The question of why is something that a lot of trademark scholars are not sure about. Why do we want to prohibit the registration of these kinds of things? One idea, which I think is probably, and Lisa might have a different view, but one idea is we don't want to give government seal of approval to these kind of things. Another idea is we don't want people to be exposed to these kind of scandalous marks. But that's problematic, that one.
Scandalous marks sounds so scandalous, and it's not just Paddy Gower who's wanted one.
Red Bull says, reach new heights, break the boundaries. Red Bull takes you there.
Red Bull gives you wings.
Well, no it doesn't. That's bull. But Red Bull couldn't register their tagline for alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks in 1999. That tagline? Bullshit.
And I think we talked about before, I was okay to say bullshit perhaps, but maybe not the other words. Now that mark was held to be scandalous matter and also to be contrary to morality. Now remember that was in 1999. So one of the things that's really interesting in this area is the standards of what is scandalous or offensive change over time. And if we go back to an earlier case, 1970s, hallelujah, applied for in the United Kingdom, that was held by a fine margin, it has to be said, to be contrary to morality. I don't think either of those, so both bullshit and hallelujah, would attract a rejection today.
That's because the world has changed and New Zealand updated the law in 2002, which Rob says is lauded around the world.
We prohibit the registration of marks likely to offend a significant section of the community, including Maori. And it's that last bit, this last reference to a specific group, which has made New Zealand quite unique. What's more, this idea of likely to offend makes New Zealand law potentially wider in terms of its scope than the other British Commonwealth countries like Australia, which still refers to scandalous matter, and the United Kingdom, which has a section to do with contrary to morality or public order.
Likely to offend.
Mm-hmm.
Talk me through that.
Yes, so although New Zealand has different law than the United Kingdom, we still refer to this United Kingdom when trying to make sense of what likely to offend means. So the Intellectual Property Office, which is where you file trademarks, they have practice guidelines which are supposed to signal how they will approach various sections of the Act. So the practice guidelines that refer to likely to offend make mention of a couple of cases, and I think both of those cases are helpful. So the first case is about an application to register tiny penis. Now, this was successfully objected to in the United Kingdom. The judge in that case said, when we're talking about being contrary to morality, it needs to be something that would create justifiable outrage or would create justifiable censure. And he thought, penis is the correct term for that particular body part, and it shouldn't be kind of degraded in use with those particular goods or services. So that's one idea.
Can I just jump in there and ask the context of who wanted to trademark tiny penis?
Yeah. I mean, there has been other penis marks that seemingly been registered in New Zealand since that time. But the other case, which is interesting, is from Europe, and that was for Dick and Fanny. And what's important about that case is the court, this is a European court, said there's a dividing line between poor taste and offensive. And those kind of ideas, so the idea that something to be offensive has to create a justifiable feeling of outrage or justifiable censure, and that there's a difference between poor taste and offensive, is what's in the IPON's guidelines. And we've only had one particular case where this has been looked at under the 2002 Act, as far as I'm aware, and it's a recent one for Brown Nose Day, which was objected to by Red Nose Day. And the Assistant Commissioner didn't offer a conclusive view, but she did say that Brown Nose Day was probably in poor taste, but not likely to offend. And I should say, as a final thing, what's difficult about this area is this assessment is supposedly objective. So the examiner at IPONS has to make this assessment from the right-minded thinking person. They have to put themselves in those shoes. And as we are all kind of sitting here and thinking, surely those shoes are quite different for each person, it's quite a subjective assessment.
Lisa Ramsey is in New Zealand to talk all things trademarks. So I asked her, how does our law compare to hers?
So in the United States, we have a section of the federal trademark law called the Lanham Act, Section 2A, that used to ban registration of marks that may disparage others or that might be immoral or scandalous. And a number of years ago, a musician, Simon Tam, applied to register the slants as a mark for the entertainment services of his rock band. And he was of Asian American descent and said he was trying to reclaim this term that had been used in a derogatory manner towards people of Asian descent. But it was refused registration as a result of this law. And the case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And in a case called Mattal versus Tam, the United States Supreme Court, for the very first time, said that the free speech right in the First Amendment applies to trademark law, and that this law was inconsistent with the First Amendment because it discriminated based on viewpoint. What Justice Alito said in his opinion is that giving offense is a viewpoint, and they noted the fact that certain terms that celebrated Asians, like celebrations, were registered, but not derogatory terms like this. And so the court struck down that law, and after that case, a number of people applied to register hate speech, offensive terms, swear words, thinking that this would be fine. And then after that case, we still had the provision of the Lanham Act that banned registration of immoral and scandalous marks. And so we have Eric Brunetti, who is a street artist who decided to put out a brand of shirts and other clothing under the brand name, I'll spell it for you instead of say it, FUCT. He claims it meant friends you can't trust, right? An acronym for that.
FUCT basically is the originator of a brand of street fashion that intentionally makes people uncomfortable. One of the most purely artistic and anti-authoritarian brands out there. So fucked. We're talking about fucked today.
Everybody all knew that really he was just trying to invoke a swear word. And so in Iancu versus Brunetti, the Supreme Court struck down this provision of the trademark law. Again, only the second time this has ever happened, on the ground that this law also discriminated based on viewpoint, and the government had conceded that if a law discriminates based on viewpoint, it's invalid. So right now, you could technically register offensive language, hate speech, swear words. But we have a different law that says if a certain phrase or a symbol doesn't actually function as a trademark to identify the source of goods and services, the trademark office can refuse it. So there's a gentleman that tried to register a swastika for flags and other types of products, and that was refused registration. And he said, I have a free speech right to register this symbol after Tam and Brunetti. And the trademark office said, no, you don't, actually. People see this as a message. It's a bad message, but as a message, and it's not something that would function as a trademark like the word apple or the apple symbol.
Wow, because I want to talk about the limit on freedom of expression. That must be a big argument to have around the trademark.
It is, right? So before the Tam and Brunetti case, a lot of people focused on the fact that the First Amendment might limit the scope of trademark rights, right? Maybe provide you with a defense to be able to use someone's trademark in a parody. Recent example, in the United States, you have dog toy companies that come out with bad Spaniels dog toys that are making fun of Jack Daniels, brand of whiskey. And so this First Amendment argument would come into play in those kinds of cases. And so here you have people actually arguing they have a free speech right to register. My perspective, though, is that there's actually a First Amendment might limit what you can register, because when you register something, what it does is it gives you the exclusive right to use that phrase or that symbol in connection with certain goods and services. And sure, there are defenses, but these days people send cease and desist letters. They will file a complaint with an online marketplace and use their registration to take down goods and services. So these kinds of registrations can actually be speech harmful and anti-competitive because they're used to suppress the speech of everyone else who might want to use this swear word, right, in connection with goods and services.
You're here, though, to talk about the role of the government in this. Talk us through this and what role the government has, what it should have and what it shouldn't have.
Well, so in the United States, in the Tam case, the Supreme Court actually said that hate speech is protected by the First Amendment, very different than pretty much everywhere else in the world. And so the government can't ban you from using hate speech. Of course, you might have consequences for using hate speech. But again, you can register hate speech and swear words with the trademark office, but it might be refused on other grounds. Again, the fact it doesn't function as a trademark or it's not distinctive. Now, if the government bans your speech, right, that implicates the First Amendment. But let's say that you post something on a social media site and Facebook or Instagram or X takes it down. That's not a government restriction of speech. So it might harm your freedom of expression, but it's not a violation of the First Amendment. So that's an important distinction, because I think a lot of people will claim censorship, my free speech rights or my First Amendment rights are violated when they can't maybe register hate speech as a username or a domain name. But again, if it's not the government that's actually regulating your speech, there's no First Amendment violation. There are actually international treaties that allow nations to ban registration of marks that might be immoral or against public policy. And so a number of years ago, I wrote a paper on this. I mean, pretty much every nation has a law like this, and it's quite common, not just to apply to offensive marks like hate speech or swear words, but also to religious words, maybe the use of Jesus or Madonna for certain kinds of goods and services. So I understand why governments want to regulate this. And again, I don't think there's a free speech problem with it. However, I agree that it is problematic that you have a government employee making decisions about what's immoral and what's not immoral. And so that's why I do like the United States approach, where they focus on, is this phrase, is this symbol actually functioning as a trademark or not? So I just mentioned to Rob that Federal Circuit Court of Appeals in the United States heard a new application to register FUCK by Brunetti, right? Not just FUCT. And that was refused registration on failure to function grounds. And again, if he gets that registration, he can stop other people from using FUCK with jewelry, retail store services. And so if you want to stop the use of this speech, right, yeah, maybe give him the registration. But if you believe in freedom of expression, anyone should be able to use these swear words, right, in connection with these kinds of goods and services. Some people want to buy jewelry that, has swear words incorporated into it.
Just being on the American scene, I know the boys in my life love to listen to American music, and I notice there are a lot of swear words that feature through that now. Have there been any words that, like singers and that, have tried to trademark and have been successful because certain words have become so much more everyday now?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So there is a singer. The name she uses is Lizzo, right? I forget her actual name. Yeah, but so I saw someone post on social media, "I'm 100% that bitch," and I don't know if you would prefer that I spell it out, but
no,
here we are.
We're good.
Okay, and so she included this lyric in her song.
Turns out I'm 100% that bitch.
She decided to have her company apply to register 100% that bitch as a trademark for T-shirts and other products, what I call expressive merchandise, right? The kinds of goods where you might display it on the front prominently. And initially, that was refused registration on the ground that it didn't function as a trademark, right? It would not have been refused under the immoral scandalous provision because that's gone. And she recently was able to overcome that refusal because the Trademark Trial and Appeal Board noted the fact that a lot of people associated this term with her. But one problem I have with this is that when you're displaying it on the front of a T-shirt, that's not really to me, a trademark use. This is more of an expressive use. So often you might have people apply to register Black Lives Matter, political slogans, etc., and they want to claim exclusive rights to use that phrase in connection with these goods. And again, if we're talking about things like T-shirts, things that might display a message, to me, I think it's problematic from a free speech perspective that they can register these terms and, again, enforce them, privately and in online marketplaces.
Just going back to Paddy for you, Rob, could he have just not trademarked it and just gone with the original version of what he wanted?
I think that's a really important point. So when you get a trademark, you get the right to stop others using the same or confusingly similar mark for those goods and services. So it's not mandatory to register. So you can still use your trademark without a registration. So I think from a free speech perspective in New Zealand, for example, I don't think the restriction even limits freedom of speech personally, because you can still use it. All you can't do is stop others from using it. Paddy would be free to use "This is the effing news" in its full glory without a registration.
But now he can just stop by having it. He can just say to others, "Back off, that's mine, stop."
Yeah, that's right, which may get us concerned from a freedom of speech perspective from the other perspective. Yeah, because now he can stop people from using that particular.
How do you go about getting a trademark? In the simplest of terms, how do you get one?
Yeah. So to get a trademark in New Zealand, you apply to the Intellectual Property Office and you fill out an application, online application, and you provide a representation of your mark and you nominate particular goods and services. So that's an important point. Your trademark only gives you rights in relation to particular goods or services, not for other goods or services. It is then examined by the Intellectual Property Office, and they examine the application to see if it meets the requirements of the Act. So if it is offensive, this is the point at which the Trademark Office might raise an objection. Then there's actually another opportunity for members of the public to oppose a trademark. So a trademark is, once it's accepted, it's published in a journal, and there's a 3-month period in which people can oppose. So that's what happened with Brown Nose Day. It was opposed by the owners of the Red Nose Day trademark. If there's no opposition or the opposition is unsuccessful, the trademark proceeds to registration, and then from registration, you have rights to exclude others.
How much does it cost?
So the cost is worked out by how many goods or services you include and by class, but I wouldn't know off the top of my head because now I'm an academic, not a practicing lawyer. But it's not more than, I think it's somewhere around $100, that kind of ballpark per class. Probably gone up since I last looked.
Trademarks can also be protected independently of registration, so you can protect an unregistered trademark by relying on an action called passing off.
So passing off protects the goodwill you might have around a particular phrase, and goodwill is built up through use. So if you were to use a phrase over a period of time, and then somebody else was to use a same or similar phrase, then you could potentially take an action against them relying on passing off. To succeed, you'd need to show that you have goodwill. People associate that phrase with you. The use is likely to create a misrepresentation, and that misrepresentation causes you some damage.
And if you're impersonating a company online, you might be able to use trademark law or passing off law in that way. So there have definitely been cases where people have set up fake websites in the United States. This one was a registered mark, but Planned Parenthood is a registered mark. And an anti-abortion activist set up a fake website that said, "Welcome to the Planned Parenthood website" at PlannedParenthood.com, I believe. And so when people got there, they thought it was Planned Parenthood's website, but instead he talked about the cost of abortion. And so you definitely could use trademark law in those kind of contexts if people are using your mark to confuse about the source of the message or the goods and services.
So with an evolving language, how often is the Act reviewed so once offensive words can be taken off the naughty list?
So this is the great question. We don't really know. I mean, so standards change, and that's one of the real challenges and why people sometimes feel uncomfortable about intellectual property officers making these kind of decisions. They really need to make an evaluation based on societal norms, and those norms change over time. It's like bullshit, for example, is now, I think, a term we hear on the news from time to time even.
And he's a disaster now. He's just got a good line of bullshit.
And while in 1999 that might have been problematic, I'm guessing today if Red Bull were to apply for it, then it wouldn't be problematic.
Yeah, I would say in the United States, this is one of the reasons why the court struck down these laws, is because you had a lot of inconsistent decisions. They pointed out in the briefs filed in the case, here are all these swear words, hate speech words that are registered. Here are ones that are not. And a lot of folks think you shouldn't trust government employees to make these kinds of decisions. And I'm sympathetic to that argument. However, trademark law all the time, they have vague laws that courts, trademark offices have to make difficult decisions. So that's not unique to immoral and scandalous and disparaging terms. But the problem is there's just no certainty. There's not a list of banned words. And so when you apply, you don't know if you're going to be able to get a registration or not. But again, as Rob noted, you can still use it, right? And so I think I agree with him that I do not see as much of a free speech problem that you can't register something because of the fact you can use it.
I will give the final word today to my old workmate Paddy Gower. And really, what the F is his trademark show all about?
What I can say is I will be doing some absolutely epic shit.
Hey, this is a library.
Bro, come on. This is the news.
And that's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Rob Batty and Lisa Ramsey. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Mark Chesterman. I'm Amanda Gillies. Matua.